Hey, copycat quilters! It's National Sew a Jelly Roll Day, and I'm here today with my serger, and I'm going to show you a walk through some of the jelly roll quilts that I've made. So stick around.
Here's the jelly roll strip I decided to use. It's full of like really bright, cheerful, colorful flowers and pretty bright colors. And there were a couple of these strips that had a white background, and the one in between there you can see is actually a white on white. And so I thought instead of using those that way, I wanted to try something a little different to add into my jelly roll. So I took a purple strip and sewed it to white, and then took one of the pink strips and sewed it to the white. Those were the ones that I had duplicates of. I sewed them together in long strips, and then I cut them apart into 2.5-inch sections, and then twisted those sections and sewed them back together to make 4 patches. And here are the 4 patches that I created. Now, in order to sew these into my Jelly Roll Race strips, I needed to first do that long chain of 2 strips sewn together, and then cut those apart and insert these 4 patches into it. Here I'm sewing my strips end to end, and you can see I had the selvages on, so I just used the serger to trim that off. I did all of these jelly roll quilts on my serger because it's just so much faster. My serger has about 1,800 stitches per minute, so I can zoom through these quilts really quickly. I actually took my jelly roll and split it into 2. Since the colors are kind of clumped together, I decided to do that. I just broke it in half and laid it side by side, and then I would pull one strip from one pile and the next strip from the other pile. And that way I was making sure to mix the colors up a little. After I'd sewn the 2 strips together, I took that to my table and laid it out carefully, flipping it back and forth so that I would be sure there wouldn't be a twist in the long strip. And then I took that pile that had gone back and forth and kind of laid it across my lap so that I could pull both ends and start sewing right sides together. It is good to try not to twist your strips, but even if you do, don't worry. When you get to the end and there's that fold there, if it's twisted, you can just cut across, straighten it back up, and then keep going. And here's how the quilt turned out. You can see those 4 patches here and there throughout the quilt. I wasn't thrilled with how it turned out. It's very hard to plan placement on a jelly roll quilt because you're folding over and sewing again, and it's very difficult to figure out where things might end up. And I feel like these 4 patches kind of ended up unequal across the quilt, but I still think it turned out cute, and I'm thinking maybe next time I will either put a lot more 4 patches in, or maybe make a bigger 16 patch, a 4x4, and sew it into a strip of 4s, and that way it might stand out a little more. I'm still really happy with how this one turned out. I think it's very bright and cheerful and will make a beautiful little quilt. So here's another jelly roll quilt, but guess what? It's not from a jelly roll. I actually took leftover scraps of batiks that I had. A lot of them were with the fabric, but some weren't. I used my Accuquilt cutter to cut them all into 2.5-inch strips, and then just rearranged them so that no 2 colors were beside each other. I also added in some black strips. I didn't have enough of the batik scraps, and I really didn't want to buy any additional fabric, so I just took fabric that I had that was a black solid and cut those into 2.5-inch strips. So I just added the black strips in until I had 40 strips, and then I used that to make my jelly roll quilt. It's okay that some were a little shorter. These jelly roll quilts kind of come out to your own dimensions based on how much you trim off the edges and things like that, and this still came out to be about 56 by 50 inches, so it's a nice size to donate to a cancer center local. Just like my other jelly roll quilts, I did this one on my serger, and this time I decided to time it just to see how long it took. Now, I didn't count the time that I was cutting the jelly roll strips, because if I had used a regular jelly roll, I would not be doing that. But I did count the time that I was sewing the ends together, and then the time to actually sew the strips together and make the quilt. And it was about 1 hour and 40 minutes from start to finish to have this beautiful quilt top done. You just can't get a lot faster than that to put together a quilt top. So here's another fun jelly roll quilt that I did. This one I used half of a jelly roll that was solid colors, and that jelly roll was a rainbow jelly roll. I took out all of the colors that were the yellows and oranges, kind of the warmer colors, and some of the lime green, and I set those aside, and I just used the blues and the reds and the purple colors for this one. And then I also added in half of a strip of a black and white jelly roll. So that way I had all of my strips, but it didn't come out just screaming rainbow. And as a bonus, now I have the other half of that strip that I can use that's going to make a pretty citrus yellow and green and orangey color quilt. Now after I got finished, I thought, no, it needs something a little more, and I decided, why not stick emoji faces on there? So I have an emoji die from Accuquilt that has all the different shapes for the faces and the eyes and things like that. Obviously, you don't have to have the Accuquilt die. You could cut circles and draw your own emoji faces and applique them on, or anything else you can think of. I've seen some pretty ones done with just different sizes of circles kind of lumped together. And that just kind of broke up that straight lineness of the jelly roll. Basically, once you get the strips sewn together, you can start thinking of all kinds of crazy ideas to make it a little different. So this is the last one I'm going to share today. This was made from jelly roll strips, and it was a nice gray and dark with black prints that I thought would make a really nice masculine quilt. This one I took 5 strips and sewed them together, which made a 10.5-inch wide strip set, and then I cut that into 10.5-inch squares so that I could turn the squares, and one would go vertical and one would go horizontal and go back and forth. I wanted to try to kind of achieve a woven look. I thought it turned out really nice. I used some solid strips around the edges. I tried to make it look like the blocks were kind of going under that strip and then over. I'm not sure I achieved that effect, but I was really happy with the way this turned out. Now I do call this quilt I Hate Minky because the back of this quilt I used minky fabric instead of a quilting cotton. So this is the minky side, and it shows off the quilting beautifully. I used what I call chasing triangles and chasing circles, and they're from rulers. And because I was working from the front of the quilt, I could follow the strips, and it turned out making a really nice grid design on the back. But I didn't really enjoy working with a minky. The fuzz just gets to me too much. I know everyone loves those quilts, and I probably will do them again, but it's not going to be my favorite. I prefer quilting cotton.
So let me know what you think. Have you made a jelly roll quilt before? Have you done the jelly roll race? Have you fixed up your jelly rolls to be a little different than everyone else's? Let me know in the comments below and stick around for more videos. Thanks for watching.